Hey guys, welcome back again. Hopefully you guys are all doing good. Had a great weekend. 1 second, I just need to close the window over here and I'm gonna get myself a little soft drink, but I'll be right back. 1 second. Okay. Cool, just about 3 minutes and then we will get things rolling today. Nice, okay. All set to go, just a couple minutes till 12:45. Welcome back, everybody. Hi, Con, good to see you. Jonah, hello. Welcome back. Guess we made it out to March. What do you think? Did the first 2 months take forever, or did it just fly right by? I hear people say both, but I can never kind of decide on my own. Hey, Trevor. Yeah, they did fly by, I guess. But, you know, remember a lot of people were saying, like, oh, this is like a couple weeks into 2020, like, all right, it's already the 6th month of 2020 after a couple weeks. So I don't know. I've heard it both ways. But, yeah, it depends, I guess, on whether you're having fun or not. And some people say time flies when you're having fun. Welcome back. Good to see you, Noah, and Paul, Lauren, everybody else, Tatsuma. Welcome back. Just a couple seconds to go. Eddie. Very rare Eddie sighting. Has he shown up in this class yet? I know Peachy's here like all the time. But this is her brother, the big boy, Eddie. And, you know, he's a total sweetheart. But he is a little more shy. Anyway, guys, welcome back. It's 12:45, so I'm going to go ahead and let things get started right now. Thanks again for your time, attendance, and all of your preparation for the class. The last time that you were dealing with me was Thursday when you took the first quiz, and I've been working grading those quizzes. I'm almost totally done with it, but I do need just a couple more days. Brother, sister pair, boy was more shy. Yeah, it's very similar actually. He's scared of guests and stuff, and she always has to kind of like entertain everybody when people come over and they want to see our cats. But yeah, Eddie, he keeps to himself. He's a real family man, I guess you could say. He's very, very chill and docile around us, and I mean, he's very peaceful, but he just hides and stuff when people come over. Anyway, yeah, so thanks again, everybody, for being here. So I was just saying, last time you took your quiz, and I'm finishing grading for it. It's just going to take me a couple more days. I realized that I have a little bit longer time span to work on because your midterm is not for another 2 weeks, but I will be done with those quiz grades this week in the next few days. So I'll let you know by email, by Canvas notification for the class when it's ready. And that's just going to be probably later today or maybe tomorrow. And then after that, anyone can email me to request their score for that assignment or for the first homework or for the class overall. The first homework I graded a while back. That's been done. So if anybody's still looking for the grade on that, definitely feel free to email me and I'll give you your score and any comments that pertain to your assignment. But anyway, that's just a couple of topics just having to do with the calendar of dates. We're all on schedule right now. So the next thing that's coming forward will be in a couple of weeks when we take the midterm. The midterm exam is scheduled for us March the 18th. So that's not next week, but the following week after that, Thursday the 18th. So we've got still 16 days, and we still have 2 more chapters that we got to cover. So the plan basically for us is, no, sorry, I'm misspeaking. I looked at the calendar and I'm looking at midterm review on the 18th. Thanks, guys. So the actual midterm date is March 25th. Not to worry, Noah. Yeah, it's March 25th. So we have 2 full review sessions that lead up to the midterm exam. This week we finish chapter 3, we go over chapter 3, and then next week we're going to spend time on chapter 4. Chapter 3, this week's topic is all about language and communication, so we're going to dive into that today and Thursday. Next week we will deal with chapter 4, and then in week 7 we'll wrap up whatever's left over from chapter 4 and start doing midterm review. Then we have the review sessions and the exam on the 25th. Okay, very good. So just letting you guys know about those upcoming dates. I'm looking at a copy of the syllabus on my screen here, and I can just see the dates. So, all right, then let's go ahead and start talking about chapter 3. And as usual, if anyone ever has questions, comments, anything, reactions, please put them in the chat and we'll just take them as they come. But all right, we're starting with chapter 3 now. And it is all about language and communication. Language and communication, chapter 3. That's our topic for this week. One of those memes that, oh yeah, okay, yeah, so like you started the class and then after the 3rd chapter and the 4th chapter, by the time you get to the end, you'll be what, the spiritual looking figure that's like going off in all the different directions of the universe, whatever. True enough. Language and communication, guys. So it's a very important aspect of just everyday life and being a good critical thinker to be able to communicate clearly and effectively. It's never ever hurt anybody to be more capable at speaking, writing, a more careful listener. Having that expressive power of language and speech and writing is a great asset for you in every different part of life, whether that's accomplishing various daily tasks from writing and speaking in school or at work or filing job applications or giving presentations, speaking to authority figures of all kinds. It's going to be a benefit to you to be clear, precise, and capable of expressing yourself. Now, the chapter 3 in our book, it starts by giving a reference to like a recent episode in American political history. And I guess it's mentioning this to kind of give you an actual real life anecdote that kind of sheds a little bit of light on the overall value and importance of being a good, effective communicator, or at least tells us what the stakes can be when communication is not timely and effective. So just how chapter 1 started with mention of the old social psychology experiments of Zimbardo and Milgram, we have a little anecdote here at the beginning of chapter 3 that we want to listen to. And the anecdote chosen by the author and the editor of the text is the whole case of the Benghazi scandal of 2012. I don't know if any of you guys have ever heard about this particular episode or what happened in it. I know it's not ancient history. 2012 is pretty recent overall, but many of us were focused on other things or maybe just didn't pay attention to this little item in the news. Does anybody know at all, just checking the background knowledge that some of you maybe have, Benghazi and what happened with that whole situation? Anybody know? Just, you don't have to go into great depth, but if you don't know, let me know that, or if you have heard about it, let me know that. Just kind of curious to see, am I the one telling you about this for the first time, or there's a few of us that have some background information on it? Okay, so Paul, you know a little bit about it. Anybody who would follow the news and world events would be somewhat familiar with it, but it is a bit behind us now, so let me go back over it, okay? Yeah, so basically here's what happened with the whole Benghazi situation. Put yourself back in the year of 2012. So there's a presidential election that's happening. and it's going on between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney, the Republican nominee. So it's hard to believe in a way that Romney was the standard bearer for the Republicans for so long after now we have a whole different party. But anyway, did watch the last lecture that I missed. Did we cover chapter 2? No, Noah. If you look at the syllabus, we kind of jump around a little bit. Some of the chapters in the book I thought were more interesting and important than others. So we started with chapter 8, just talking about argument. Then we went to chapter 1. Now we're on to chapter 3. And then there's chapter 4 coming next. So no, we don't cover every single chapter in the book in order, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It goes 1, it goes 8, 1, 3, 4. Then we're going to jump to, 5. And then we have chapter 9 and 12. So there's a little bit of gaps, but it's okay. Anyway, like I was saying with Benghazi, the presidential election was underway, Obama versus Romney. And during that time period, there were a lot of different protest movements that were taking hold in parts of the world that had for a long time been dominated by authoritarian control, and especially referring to places in the Middle East and majority Muslim countries. So in countries like Egypt and elsewhere, popular protest movements where young people and others were agitating in the streets for democratic reforms so that, long-standing totalitarian rule would be overthrown and usher in democratic systems of government. So that's what people wanted. That's what they were marching and protesting in the streets for. And it was actually leading to the overthrow of certain long-standing regimes, like in Egypt and in Tunisia and in other places. They called it, yes, Paul, the Arab Spring. The Arab Spring was the term that was coined in the West to refer to the outgrowth of democracy that was starting to take hold in some of these parts of the world that had not been hospitable to democracy over the past maybe 40 years or so. Arab Spring, you're supposed to think in your mind of like the dawning of a new season, spring, the green shoots of democracy starting to take ground in this fertile area of the world. So, okay, that's what's happening. Now in Libya, there was also a big protest movement against the authoritarian leader that was in control there, and that was the Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi. So Gaddafi had ruled with a kind of military dictatorship as the, authoritarian leader for 30, 40 years. And people in the wake of the Arab Spring and all these other revolutionary movements were kind of becoming upset and hoping that he could be overthrown and replaced by a more democratic system that represented the will of the people. So people were out there marching, protesting, organizing on social media and getting their message out. But Gaddafi was extremely harsh and very vindictive, extremely upset at the possibility of him being removed from power. So instead of accepting it or negotiating for new terms, he wanted to crush the protest movement with the use of military force. So he was basically threatening to go full military crackdown on the protesters and use airstrikes and overwhelming force to force them out of the streets and to just bend the knee to his leadership for another generation. And basically the United States and other Western allies of the United States were upset at this threat that he had made because it seemed credible, and basically if he had made good on it, it would have been a humanitarian disaster. We would have seen people in the streets getting bombed by airstrikes from the government that they're protesting. So that would have been unacceptable. At least it was judged to be unacceptable by our administration at the time. And so we assembled a coalition of friendly allies that were willing to assist, and we launched our own air raids against Gaddafi's government to prevent him from attacking the people. What that basically did was it gave the protesters and revolutionaries enough time, leverage, and opportunity to successfully depose Gaddafi, and basically an angry mob ended up running him out of power and killing him in the streets. So there's no more Gaddafi, and the head of state decapitated, metaphorically speaking. The leadership at the head of the state has been removed. So after that, Libya was kind of in a state of turmoil, of course. The longstanding structure of power had been eliminated. So that led to a little bit of instability. Now, we have U.S. embassies all throughout the world. Those are our diplomatic missions, which we staff internationally, where we have our personnel who engage in negotiations and diplomacy for us and upholding our United States interests at our different diplomatic facilities around the world. And there's one in Libya and where it was in Benghazi, Libya. Benghazi is just a place in Libya. It's a city in Libya, and we had the United States diplomatic embassy there. Okay, so you heard the little bit of background. Gaddafi was removed, turmoil in the streets. We have an embassy in Benghazi. Around the same time, it's just sort of a coincidence, a film had been produced in the United States by an independent filmmaker, not at all affiliated with the United States government or the United States people in general, but a private filmmaker made a movie, and basically this film was a harsh takedown of the religious figure of the Prophet Muhammad of Islam. And so, you know, in the film, he was described as like a warlike and violent and manipulative and all these other things, really uncharitable and critical presentation. And so it basically inflamed hostilities in many parts of the Muslim world, where, of course, the Prophet Muhammad is revered as sacred. It would be like the equivalent of, you know, people producing a film which was trying to pick apart the character of Jesus Christ, you know, like the prophet from, and well, Son of God in this case, of the Christian religion. So anyway, that definitely led to a lot of tension and conflict, and there were protests that started to happen in many of the areas surrounding our diplomatic facilities in different Muslim countries around the world. They were upset at the presentation of this movie, the existence of the film, you know, like a slap in the face to the religion. So people were righteously aggrieved. I mean, it's considered one of the highest violations of the religious precepts of traditional Islam to say something critical of the Prophet or, of course, God. So people were upset. Now, in Benghazi, around our diplomatic embassy, there were protesters upset at the movie. And at the time, there was a debate going on in the higher echelons of the United States government and our State Department. Basically, the question was this: how should we portray these protesters? Should we say that these are actually dangerous militants that are perhaps willing and able to wage an attack against one of our facilities? Or should we instead strike a more conciliatory tone, saying something like, this film has nothing to do with the United States or its people, and we reject it and we condemn the existence of the film, so sort of to have a more apologetic stance about the fact that the film exists. So the Obama administration and the US State Department, which was then being overseen by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, decided to take the conciliatory route and basically in our official statements and messages to present to the world that this film was objectionable, that it didn't represent the United States, and therefore please don't be upset at us and, you know, be mad at our diplomats and so forth. Well, what ended up happening in Benghazi anyway is that I guess the analysis was wrong. Communication given to the people working there was not accurate, and in fact there were militants that had formed a plot to overthrow and to attack the embassy, in which they then did, and that led to the death of some of our US diplomatic personnel over there in Benghazi. So anyway, that's pretty much the end of the story. Well, what's the moral of the story that the book wants to kind of impress us with? That sometimes life and death are on the line in dangerous situations where miscommunication can make all the difference between a safe, orderly evacuation and contingency planning versus lack of preparedness, being caught unawares, and then being caught up in a life or death situation that ends with tragedy. So they're making the point that the official line given at the time, that it was just reasonable political protest rather than militancy, which was encircling our diplomatic facilities, that might have contributed to a lack of preparedness, a shortage of room for evacuated casualties, and improper contingency planning in the event of such an attack, and, you know, proper reinforcements and everything else. So good communication skills could have helped to prevent this. Good communication skills involve keeping a dialogue open, analyzing all factors in the scenario, and being clear, accurate, and timely. At the same time, I mean, as much as this is mentioned at the beginning of chapter 3, I think that some people make a little bit too much of it. You know, there's like a whole way of going overboard with it, thinking that it's some kind of conspiratorial attempt to protect people that are hostile to U.S. interests or something. None of that is really accurate, but the point remains that when you're in a position of responsibility and life and death hang in the balance, then even more than in everyday life, when it's still important, but even more than in everyday life, it's on us to try and be really good, effective communicators. Paul, what you say here is, too bad Hillary's personal emails weren't kept properly during that time, maybe we would have had more insight into the tragedy. I don't know. Matter of pure speculation. The content of the emails, I think, traces back to dates that maybe either precede this or come after. You know, the whole Benghazi thing actually was totally litigated in congressional hearings. Hillary Clinton made herself available for a full day of questioning by a very tough group of Republican legislators in Congress. So, I mean, I feel like she did the best she could to fully answer those questions, but nonetheless, criticism is fair. You know, she shouldn't have probably been that secretive. Anyway, moving on from the example itself, we want to be good communicators. That's the larger point here. And in these lectures, we're going to learn a little bit about the important aspects of what language is, what are different types of functions that language has, what are different types of definitions and meaning. We'll also talk a little bit about what are the qualities of a good definition and what are some different communication styles that people use. And then finally, when we get to the end, we may talk a little bit about what are different rhetorical devices that can sometimes be used to manipulate a person's point of view through the use of language. So that's like the scope and aims of this chapter, starting with a little anecdote from recent history to give a sense of the general larger picture. Okay, so what is language? Let's start with that. What's language? So language is really kind of what separates us from the rest of the non-human animals. It's the thing that separates and divides us and places us on a higher plane. Language is a system of communication, first of all. And I mean, I'm using it right now to address you, the spoken form. And sometimes when we communicate through the written form of language, as you can see written on the board or typed in the page or the screen. So language is a system of communication which involves a set of symbols. Let me put that here. So a set of symbols that can be of three possible kinds. That can be either spoken, written, or nonverbal. Okay, so let me go ahead and try and explain that a little bit. And as you quote from the book, Paul, in a statement issued to the public 5 days later, Susan writes based on talking points given to her in the CIA memo. Correct, yeah, well, I mean, the talking points were decided upon by the United States State Department because in association with our allies and partners around the world, we want to have a unified messaging strategy. So you're not supposed to have some diplomats saying, well, here's what happened, and another group from the same country saying, no, we have a different view. So there had to be some kind of consensus established. Yes, it was a misjudgment, and we see that we had to live with the negative results. But I digress. Back to language. What is it? You see the definition given. A system of communication which involves a set of symbols that can be either spoken, written, or non-verbal. So what convey the meaning of words are symbols that we use. So language is built out of symbols. Sometimes the symbols are symbols of sound that you hear. So those are spoken. Like you can hear my voice right now. If I say to you, imagine a purple cow standing on the moon. You don't have to do anything mentally. It just happens automatically. The image forms in your mind just because you understand the symbolic meaning of the sounds that I've used. But here's an interesting and sort of philosophically rich thing about language. The sounds themselves are completely conventional. Which symbols we assign meanings to is totally just a matter of conventions that establish over time. So for example, one word, dog. You hear it, and you know the animal that I'm referring to using that sound, the sound phonetically that sounds like dog. But in Spanish, perro is a different sound, but it refers to the same object in the world. Or in German, Hund. So one and the same object can and is referred to by various different world languages by means of different sounds. And if you really want to trip out a little bit, imagine a counterfactual history, a timeline of the world in which far different sounds had been developed. Imagine if our physiological structure of the throat and mouth were different and we could only make certain kinds of clicks or other noises. We still could have invented a semantic set of meanings for whatever sounds that we were or are capable of making. So we don't even need to take the weird counterfactual reasoning to understand that in this actual world, there are many different world languages in which the same various ideas or objects are referred to by a multitude of possible sounds. So as I'm making these sounds to you, it is a little weird to think that the underlying meaning that they have is nothing that's necessary to the sounds themselves. They are merely stipulated and chosen over long usage through the generations. The other kinds of symbols that can be used in language, aside from the spoken word, of course, which you hear, are written inscriptions and symbols like these. So as you see the words written on the board here, they form, the letters form words, the words form sentences, and we understand those things because we're aware of the meaning of the symbols. So like when you see the symbols on the board that look like these letters, we can all be silent and not make any noise at all, and I can show you those, inscriptions, and then you'll come to know the reference of what I'm pointing at when you read books, when you read texts, anything on the computer, on your phone. That's written communication. That's also a symbol, but it's a symbol that you read or see with your eyes instead of hear with your ears. Yeah, well, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, what are you saying up here? I would have not paid a ton of attention, but we're trying to move on from the whole anecdote over here, Paul, about, the thing in the book. Yeah, okay. Well, anyways, you understand the example. The reason that I said that people go a little overboard and too far with it is just because there is a whole cottage industry of conspiracy theories that are served to people who, favor that worldview. So you also don't want to have cognitive bias. You don't want to have confirmation bias that makes you have a sort of favorable look at some evidence and an unfavorable look at others. But to get to this, yeah, nonverbal communication, we're still waiting for that because I'm going through the other two cases first. So there's also written. The same symbols that you see here, which encode for the idea of dog, if you're looking at the same symbols used in like Chinese or Japanese or Arabic, visually it's not at all going to appear the same way, but it's the same kind of idea being referred to or the same thing. So whether it's spoken symbols, written symbols, we use language in either way. And then there's nonverbal. So nonverbal communication is something like, take for example, sign language, right? With sign language, I don't know, like I think this means I love you or something, but I obviously don't know much sign language, but at the same time people do. And when you know sign language, you don't have to be listening to someone, you don't have to be looking at symbols written on a page, but you get the nonverbal idea across through either actual American Sign Language, other forms of sign language, and there's also body language and tone of voice. So all of these are different ways that we communicate in language. Language, we're born into it, the language of our native tongue. It's also what transmits to us information from all distant corners of the world and from the past. How is it that sitting here right now that the Declaration of Independence was signed in 1776? Because, I mean, you weren't there. No one that is alive now was there. So the only way that we know is because of the writings that have survived into the current day, which record the events of history and get passed down from generation to generation. So if anybody knows anything about what we're doing now in 100 years, it'll only be because of the transmission of these facts through some form of symbolic communication in language of whatever kind. Okay, there are thousands of world languages. Some people argue, like the famous philosopher and linguist Noam Chomsky. Well, he's today more known as a political commentator and political theorist, but his earliest work was all in the field of linguistics, and that's where he made his biggest impact to start his academic career. And he made this powerful position called universal grammar. He thought that beneath all the differences on the surface of world languages, there's like a common grammar structure that they all obey, so they're not as different as they may seem on the surface. That, I think, is the dominant position in linguistics, but some people do disagree. There's a few who say no to Chomsky because if you find certain highly atypical languages in some indigenous parts of the world, like if you go very deep into the Amazon rainforest, you're going to see languages that far differ from the mainstay of conventions that you see syntactically in other world languages. But that's just a point of debate. Neither side needs to be argued in favor of here. So yes, and context-free grammar can be used in computer science, which is one of the not natural languages. We call those formal languages, like the language of set theory, metalogic, and so forth. Natural languages are languages that just develop through informal conventions of speech and behavior, like English, French, German, Italian, or any other world language. When you speak of computer programming languages like C++ or anything else, those are formal languages, and they have their own syntax and grammar as well. Okay, so language, just getting started with it. Again, it's what separates us from the non-human animals. Imagine yourself as a living creature that did not have language. You'd be kind of unable to think about anything except the immediate circumstances of your environment, because you couldn't, for example, form a thought about something abstract, far away, or not happening in your immediate environment. You may have memories or whatever, but you couldn't like be relayed information as detailed as we are the third planet from the sun, or you know, knowing facts about science or astronomy or anything beyond the surface level. Okay, so language. Next up, we're going to talk about what are some different functions of language. What are some different things that language can be used to do or to accomplish? And the textbook refers to 4 different main functions of language. So here we go, 4 functions of language. So beginning with the informative function of language. So the informative function of language is just when you make statements that are either true or false. So to make statements or claims that are either true or false. Informative. So one of the first lessons in the class was I talked to you guys back on one of our first meetings about what are different types of sentences. And that in a way comes back to play now a little bit because informative function of language is kind of like using assertoric sentences, basically. Any sentence that is either true or false, when you issue such a sentence or say it or write it, you're using language in the informative sense. To be a little more jargony about it, in logic they sometimes say that any statement which has a truth value is an assertoric sentence. So the informative function of language is simply to give statements that have some truth value, whether it's true or false. So like if I tell you that the midterm exam is on Thursday, March 25th, that would be me passing on information to you which is true. That is the true date of when it happens. Sometimes we pass on information which is not true. That's obviously a problem because we want to know the truth. If somebody told you we are the 5th planet from the sun, they would be giving you false information about the actual position that we have relative to the sun that we are orbiting. Now, a person might say that to you because they themselves are misinformed. If that's the case, they're giving you misinformation. Another possibility is someone is deliberately giving you false statements in order to deceive you, and that would be like deception. Well, in the best case scenario, we hope that we both pass along true information and receive it from other people. But that takes a little work sometimes to determine whether the statement you've heard is accurate. In other cases, it takes work on your behalf to make sure that you don't just casually pass along a falsehood that someone else then operates off of. Especially with the internet, they say that falsehoods circulate quite rapidly. And sometimes if they're cool sounding or interesting to a person, or they serve their pre-existing ideology or agenda, then people will hold fast to a lie or a falsehood because they prefer to believe it than what's true. Or maybe the truth disturbs them and so they can't face the reality. But we're good critical thinkers, and so we're trying to just have an objective and rational, clear-headed appreciation of facts and truth. So we want to try our best to say things that are true. And one major function, perhaps the primary function of language, especially for logic, is information. Okay, now another function of language is the directive function of language. The directive function of language reminds us of the term brought up earlier in the class, which is imperatives. So directive language is just using commands. It's the use of imperatives to direct or to influence actions. So the use of imperatives to direct or at least influence actions. So sometimes we're not trying to provide information for people to judge as true or false. In some cases, we simply are trying to direct a person. So if I tell you, get out of the car, put that away, wait for me, stop doing that. If I say such a thing as this, I'm not trying to give a claim to be judged as true or false. Instead, I'm trying to direct your behavior through commands themselves. It's another important piece or function of language. We need direction in cases, and sometimes we have to give people directions so that we can get them to do what we want. That's a cool thing about human life. I mean, an animal can look at another animal and kind of gesture at stuff or make noises that give a sense of perhaps what it wants, but only a human being can say something very specific, like, go pick up that screwdriver, bring it to me, then sit down in the chair and wait. Stuff like that, very complex directions revolve around the access to language and the meaning behind the symbols in language. So another important part of language is directive language, another function. A third possible use or function is expressive language. So expressive function of language is when you use language to communicate feelings, attitudes, or emotions, and it's used to bring about an emotional response or impact in the hearer or the audience that you're interacting with. So I'll put it this way: communicates feelings and attitudes and is used to bring about an emotional impact. Try to get it in there in the space. Impact, okay? Expressive function communicates feelings and attitudes and is used to bring about an emotional impact. So with expressive function of language, think about stuff like poetry and song lyrics and verse. When you're listening to a song, for example, the song lyrical content is not telling you like factual information that you're supposed to evaluate as true or false. It's not trying to direct you to literally do anything, but what it may do is get you to feel the vibe of the lyrics or whatever. If this is a song about like a breakup and it's like one of those sad songs, then maybe listening to it, you kind of get a little bit of the melancholy spirit of the lyrics conveyed through the expressive force of the writing. If you're reading one of those old Shakespearean sonnets, you know, singing the praises of one's lover in all this elevated language, then that might engender within you like the attitude or the feeling of the longing and love and so forth of the subject of the poem. If it's like one of those high energy like pop songs that's all like positivity and happiness, then you might get a feeling of the optimism and so forth energy expressed by lyrics. So sometimes words are used to make us feel some type of way. And that's a different function of language than trying to engage in practical tasks and direct actions or in the exchange of information, true or false. Okay, so expressive language, another important piece of how we use it. And then the fourth one that the textbook goes into is ceremonial language. Ceremonial function of language is just when you use language in certain official or formal type situations. Okay, so used in official / formal situations, hence the name ceremonial. So sometimes the use of language is not improvisational or off the cuff, but is governed by a set of ceremonial rules and expectations that govern the way that the ceremony or official setting proceeds. Can anybody think of a use of language in which the way that terms are spoken and things are said is kind of official, formal, and rule-based, or at least convention-based, whether it's a formal rule or something that's just expected of all participants to such a ceremony? So I've got examples, but maybe you have some that you can throw out there. So you say here, Preston debates. Sure. So like in formal debate, for example, there are rules for how the debate goes, and so you have like a moderator, people address the topic, a certain window of time is given for rebuttal. That's one possible case. Okay, Jonah, you mentioned in church, another good example. Like if a person is, let's say, giving a sermon, or there is some type of other religious ritual that's being observed in church, then it could be that there are certain words and a certain even order of words that are expected as a formal requirement of that. Weddings, another good example. Trevor, do you take this person to love, honor, obey until death do you part? And the person says, I do. This is certainly something that is a rule-based ceremonial feature of wedding ceremonies. And so that's another good example. Paul, you say if a phrase is said more by society expectations, is it ceremonial? Like, please, thank you, bless you, thank you for your service. Good question. The textbook mentions certain very common forms of polite greeting and momentary exchanges with people in social life. Like you've had this experience where you're dealing with a total stranger, like a employee at a coffee shop, and as you go up to get your order, they say, hi, how are you? And you're like, oh, fine, thanks, and you? Good. And so then you proceed to give your order. You might say that certain very formal mode of polite greeting could fit into the category. It's a little bit, I think, of a gray area because some of those things become less formal, but depending on the way that people interact, it could fit the bill. Paul, but they are sort of rules in that we are expected to say such things by society. Yes, that's why I say it's on the borderline, but it fits to me. And I think the book also gives a reference to something similar. Like in the book, it says, a fourth function of language is used in prescribed formal circumstances, such as the greeting, how are you, and I do, in a marriage ceremony, and amen after a prayer. So yes, those are all good examples. I would also throw in like legal settings. If you're in court and they say, how do you plead to this charge? And you say, not guilty, your honor, or whatever. Also those statements that govern courtroom proceedings by the lawyers when they file objections, when a person is ruled to be in contempt of court. There are certain rules for speech. There's the entering of a person's oath of office when they swear on some holy or sacred text to uphold and defend the Constitution. Rules of debate and procedure in the Senate and the House, in Congress. So these are all good examples, guys. I would also think about maybe the reading of Miranda rights when a person is arrested on the site of an arrest. You have a right to remain silent. Anything you say or do can or will be used against you. This is an official statement that has to be given so a person is aware of their constitutional rights pertaining to arrest and detention. So anyway, we've got 4 at least functions of language. To be honest, though, I kind of wondered why it was that the book did not include inquiry as another of the major functions. Certainly sometimes you're just asking a question, and that's not really telling people things, directing them, getting into the feelings that they may have, or something ceremonial. But maybe there's a way of characterizing question asking as a part of direction. I don't know, like tell me the answer to this question. But I digress. So anyway, you got these 4 functions, and it's also noted that sometimes language can achieve combinations of these things in more than one at a time. Like if I say to somebody, meet me at 12 noon on Thursday at Orange Coast College, which is on the corner of Fairview and Adams in Costa Mesa. What I just did there was I directed the person what to do, but I also informed them of where it was. So 2 parts of the linguistic function kind of combined into one. So, you know, intelligent creatures that we are, we can sometimes make our communication more efficient by accomplishing more than one task in a given written or spoken exchange. Okay, so good. Yeah, you could, I guess, also try to smuggle it into the informative function if you thought that was the more proper category. Once you get the information that the question requests, now you're in a position to give it as an informative statement. But not to worry. Good. Thank you for your comment. So let's go ahead then and move to the next. We've talked about different functions of language. I want to just speak to you guys, I guess, without a lot of written notes about nonverbal language and body language. And I guess it's kind of fitting in a way that I'm not going to create a bunch of notes because this is all about how you can communicate without using written words or speech acts. So sometimes they say that nonverbal communication and body language is just as important as what we say or write verbally. As some have said, it doesn't just matter what you're saying, but a lot of times it matters how you say it. And part of the nonverbal aspects of communication is also tone and manner of speech. So, right, one and the same statement, depending on how you present it in your tone, can have a very different reaction with your audience. Like if you ask somebody, or if you say to somebody, let me think of a good example where the tone change can completely change the tenor of the comment. Where's the remote control? If I just ask that question in a neutral tone of voice, it's whatever. But if I ask it angrily, where's the remote control? It sounds like now I'm getting pushy at someone. In another case, yeah, all caps in written communication can really change the message, making it sound more aggressive, edgy, pushy than it might have seemed with a more moderate or normal manner of presentation. So sometimes you have to make sure that you keep in focus, not just what you're saying to people, but how you bring it up and how you say it. The tone of voice, whether it's aggressive, withdrawn, aloof, mocking, sarcastic, serious, can make a lot of difference to how the message is received. And if you want to be a good communicator, you have to consider the receiving end of the message and not just how it feels to say it or how you feel when you say it. So nonverbal cues like body language, tone of voice can influence how people interpret what you're saying or communicating. Another feature of body language and nonverbal communication is that it can oftentimes reinforce and assist our actual spoken communication. And we do this all the time. If you're a good communicator, then you become somewhat skilled at the ability to use body language and hand gestures and stuff to get a point across a little bit better. An easy example of it that's mentioned in the book is simply using gesture to indicate something that you're pointing at. So if I say, what do you guys think about like this coconut liqueur that you see over here? By me gesturing at it, pointing towards it, etc., it's much more effective at getting you to understand what I'm asking and think about it than if I just say, there's a can of liqueur on this table, and so what do you think about it? And I'm just like maintaining direct focus on you, not trying to guide your attention to it or whatever. So yes, gesticulation, ostension, as they sometimes call it, is a fine way of making a point clearer. And oftentimes we do that subconsciously, but we should sometimes think about how to, make a more effective presentation of language. Another case is the simple act of nodding when you say yes. That gives a person a greater sense of the agreement to the statement that you are offering. The person says, do you think that the world is round? You're like, oh yeah, for sure. It's much different than if you just say, yes, I do, and you just kind of have this like dead 1,000-yard stare. Assent is expressed verbally or in writing, but gesturing in a way that gives the emphasis to your act of agreement helps. Just like when you say no, as you shake your head no. Doesn't that have a bit more of a forceful impact and get the point across more vividly than just saying no? I don't know, perhaps. That's mentioned in the book. Another thing that is talked about in the same part of the notes of the book is that sometimes body language, instead of reinforcing the point of your verbal communication, can actually undermine what you're trying to say or put across, especially if you intend to deceive somebody. So it's been argued, and I think it's true, that some skilled law enforcement officers, judges, lawyers, other authority figures can sometimes detect when there are telltale signs that you're trying to be dishonest or evasive, right? Like eye motion, yes, exactly. Unsteadiness of your gaze, wavering of your tone of voice. These can sometimes give away that you don't actually mean what you say or that you are nervous. So keep that in mind when you are in a position of honesty and you're being called on to provide truthful testimony, especially if you have any motive to evade the truth. You don't want to necessarily betray your position by the use of body language. So you have to kind of monitor yourself and keep these things in mind, how it is that you're being observed by the other. Another important aspect of nonverbal communication and language is the use of images in photo and video. There's an old saying, I think maybe some of you might have heard it, that a picture can tell 1,000 words, or a picture is worth 1,000 words. What that saying is trying to give across is that sometimes, even if you have the most detailed and well-written account of something, it will not be able to convey with the same kind of force and clarity the facts as a simple picture of the same would do. So we should be able, as 21st century digital savvy, internet savvy people, to use all the tools at our disposal to communicate as effectively as we can, including the use of images, video, memes, and etc. to make a point. Paul, you say eyes looking up indicates someone is trying to recall information. Eyes looking down mean they're trying to create information. Noted. Well noted. I'll keep that in mind the next time I'm trying to trick somebody. Just kidding. I'm very honest, so I would never do that. Yeah, anyway. So pictures can tell 1,000 words. You heard me say this. Consider, for example, that there was a very detailed written account of like a tragic event. You know, a natural disaster has leveled a whole city in some, coastal town. And you read an account of it, and it's like Pulitzer Prize winning, language. This was a shock to all the people there gathered around the town square, the waves crashing through from the tsunami, completely displaced and tore homes apart, limb from limb. You see a chimney lying in the street. I don't know. That, I guess, gives you a sense of it, and you might feel the impact of the events, but just looking at a video or photo of the same is probably going to make a bigger impact. That's why, newspapers and media will provide a headline image to go with the stories of the day, because it makes it more resonant, more relatable, and more clearly understood. So I would say that young people, and a lot of you guys are young, are probably some of the best tech-savvy, media-savvy, smartphone-blazing group of people in the world that has ever seen. So you're going to probably go forward into the future with better skills at presenting information through all digital media than past generations had. So that's a good thing. So keep also in mind that when you're using language to communicate, you want to listen to the other party carefully as well. Try to be clear, but also be willing to listen and ask the other person to clarify things or repeat them if you didn't understand. I find that sometimes a person is a little bit shy or embarrassed to ask for clarification because it sort of indicates, oh, I didn't understand you, or maybe it went over my head. But there's no point to sitting and listening to someone if at the end you don't really know what they were talking about. So make sure that you get everything clear, ask for clarification, be willing to follow up and ask follow-up questions. Just have the most productive meeting of the minds with other people when you talk to them. And that's how you'll get the most out of language. So the next thing in the book that is talked about are what are some different types of definitions and what are different types of meanings. So let's go over that. Eddie, you feeling, oh my God, these cats are crazy. So Eddie's up here and like Peachy's down there, they're playing like some kind of game. All right, go, run along, boy, run along. Okay, so back to the lesson. Cool. What are two different types of meaning? Two types of meaning, we have these. Denotative meaning and, on the other hand, connotative meaning. Denotative and connotative meaning. So language is built out of words. Words have meaning or definition. And so there are different ways of thinking about the concept of meaning or definition. Two broad distinctions here are denotative meaning and connotative meaning. So let's see what these mean. Denotative meaning is just like the official dictionary definition of a given word. So with the denotative meaning of a term, you're basically just stating the essential core attributes or features of the thing with no kind of slang or associations or experiences built into the definition, just a basic, straightforward dictionary, literal dictionary definition. So states essential attributes of something like a dictionary definition. Okay, denotative. The word denotative refers to denoting, and to denote something is just to refer to it in language. So what the word denotes is its denotative meaning. And again, that's just the statement of the essential attributes of whatever the word is, whatever the word refers to, and it's like an official dictionary definition. Let me hold on for a moment before I give examples, and I want to switch to the other type here, connotative meaning. So connotative meaning, by contrast, is the type of meaning a word has, but it is based on past experience and associations. It's often a slang definition of the same word. It's not its literal, official kind of dictionary meaning. And because it's based on past experience and associations, it is sometimes said that connotative meaning can be either positive or negative in force. So let me write this and we'll explain. This is meaning that is based on past experience and associations and can be either positive or negative. Okay, connotative meaning. So let me give you a quick example. This is an example used in the book, and then we can spin off some other examples similar to that. Okay, take the one word dog. What is its denotative meaning? Okay, well, the denotative meaning of dog is just literally what kind of animal that word refers to. So a member of Canis familiaris, a mammal species in the phylogenetic tree of life. So those animals that are of that species which exhibit those phenotypical traits, that's what the word dog refers to in its denotative sense, okay? But take the same word dog and think of how it can be used as a term of slang, right? So sometimes a person will say like, I don't know, yeah, I'm just gonna hang with my dogs, chill with my dogs or whatever this weekend. And in that case, the person, I don't think, usually means I'm hanging out with like actual canines this weekend. But if it's being used as a slang term, then it does mean like my friends or whatever, my buddies. And in that case, the word dog, we're trading on past experience and associations with the word of like your loyal companion, you know, man's best friend, kind of these companionable animals. And so using dog as a term of slang to refer to one's friends can evoke those positive associations and have that connotation. On the other hand, sometimes the same word dog could be used as a term of insult, like men are dogs, or that person just looks like a dog to me, it's not attractive. You know, if you say stuff like that, now you're trading on the term dog and its associations of animality. They're bestial, they are not cognitively sophisticated, they just go for the nearest pleasure at the expense of all else. So in that case, you're trying to call out those features of dogs and label, let's say, men with that type of negative stereotype. And that's not the only example that can be given. Can anybody else think of a word which may have one like formal denotative meaning, but then it has a different set of possible connotative meanings or slang meanings that are different from that? I've got a whole bunch of them, but you guys, young people, are usually masters of all things slang, so sometimes you come with some funny examples of your own. Okay, well, you're going straight away, Paul. I don't want to say this necessarily in the live chat because I don't want to, you know, get flagged or something, but fair enough. I mean, as we know, that's a term denotatively, which just refers to like a female dog. But when used as a term of insult or whatever, as a derisive label for a person, I guess you're trading on, again, the animalistic qualities of such things. Okay, fair. Yes. Trevor, you say sick? Cool. Yeah, that's a fair example. Sick, like literally, would just mean the person's not physically well or they have some type of illness. But sick, in the slang sense, is just something cool, awesome, you know, a sick movie, or that was like a sick song, sick concert. Not bad. That's another one. Okay, so I could keep going while you're thinking of more. How about the word cool as a temperature condition? That's its denotative meaning, the environmental temperature condition. But cool in its connotative sense can mean a person that, you know, they're like hip and awesome and unflappable. Or you can say, I got a cool reception at the job interview. I don't think I got it. These people were being... So in that case, you're referring to something being cold or frigid and not warm. Hot, another case, Jonah, kind of the opposite of cool in this case with temperature. You know, it's like a hotter condition of temperature, but hot as a term of praise for a person's appearance or something. It's like they look good. So, I mean, examples abound. Many more could be given beyond this. Let me just read from the book while maybe some of you think about that. Says here, denotative and connotative meaning. Words have both denotative and connotative meanings. The denotative meaning of a word or phrase expresses the properties of the object, being, or event that the word is symbolizing. It is the same as its dictionary definition. For example, the denotative meaning of the word dog is a domesticated member of the species Canis familiaris. Any being that has these properties, domesticated member of Canis familiaris, is a dog by dictionary definition. But the connotative meaning of a word or phrase includes feelings and personal thoughts that are elicited on the basis of past experiences and associations. The word dog may elicit thoughts of a loyal pet, or at the opposite extreme, something that is worthless or of poor quality, like a despicable person or an ugly person. The connotative meaning of a term may be included in a list of dictionary definitions, or may simply be shared among a specific group of people. And let me say something about that last point, because I told you that the denotative meaning is like the official dictionary definition, and so you might think, what, then the connotative meaning does not appear in the dictionary? Not necessarily. In some cases, especially after the term, which is originally just jargon or slang, assumes enough cultural prominence, then it will be added as one of the listed definitions attached to the word in the standard dictionary or reference guide of word meanings. So like, it won't be the primary definition. If you look up the word dog, it's not going to say right next to it your best, one of your homies or something. But if you go far down enough after the primary, secondary, tertiary, you might get to one of the additional listed definitions where it includes one of its connotative meanings to just be exhaustive and cover all possibilities of reference with the word. But the denotative meaning will usually be listed first because a dictionary wants to give you the official meaning of the word before we go into other less common associations that it may have as well. There is the Urban Dictionary, true enough, but you're also going to see some of those words listed in the Urban Dictionary in a common dictionary. Maybe not the ones that are the most cutting edge, like the ones that are just popping off right now. I don't know if you look in the actual Oxford English Dictionary, if you look up cap, it's going to say like dishonesty or something. So they take a little while, I guess, to enter the lexicon as a member of the dictionary definitions. Okay, so good. Next, as we continue on this theme of different types of meanings, we're going to talk about different types of definitions. There's a range of those that are mentioned in the book, and I kind of wanted to sample the ones that I thought were the most important or interesting. So different types of definitions, here we go. One of them is a stipulative definition. Okay, so stipulative definitions are just definitions that are given to new terms that emerge in our language. Okay, so stipulative definitions which are given to new terms that emerge within our language. So here's an interesting thing about language, among many other interesting things, that it's always changing, and that one and the same language, English for example, can sound very different on the surface level from time to time, generation to generation. So imagine you could take a time machine going back to the time of Elizabethan England, and you're dealing with these people speaking in Shakespearean type of English. It is the same language, but if any of you guys have ever cut your teeth trying to read those old works of classic Shakespeare, sometimes it is a bit tricky, right? Because of how many large words that are out of common usage that are employed in those writings. So it's a bit of a task sometimes to come away with a clear understanding for a modern English speaker who's not speaking in this sort of elevated terms of phrase that were common back then. And vice versa, if we could, beam one of those people over to 2021, I think they would have a hard time listening to a lot of the music or just talking in an everyday conversation with certain young people, because even though it's English, many words that they use are no longer in common usage. And there are many words today that we have, and idiomatic expressions that we have, that either were not used back then or didn't exist back then. And if we can imagine a world into our own future, hundreds of years from now, there could be people, human beings in the year 2300 that look back at all the old social media and video that started to emerge around the 20th and 21st century and say, man, human beings were talking using such weird forms of speech back then. Anyway, the point remains. The language changes. And why does it change? Because some words exit the everyday usage of our lexicon and other new words appear there. So with stipulative definitions, we're thinking about the new words that emerge within language. Can anybody think of some words that had no meaning or didn't even exist like 100 or 200 years ago? Because maybe the technology or the social concept or the framework for understanding it didn't even exist yet. Paul, you said also idioms and gestures that don't have meaning anymore, like I bite my thumb at thee. Yes, there are many expressions such as those that don't have any kind of current usage. Okay, text me. That'd be a good one. Yeah, so to text a person, if you could imagine saying this in the year of 1850, someone would just scratch their head wondering, what are you meaning? Okay, that's cap. There you go, Jonah. There have been many words to talk about a person being facetious, dishonest, or like not being real with something. But the word cap as a phrase that refers to that is new. Yeah, let's see. What about, I mean, if I talked about anything having to do with the internet, you know, if I said, what about your modem? And if I was talking to a farmer in the 1850s, there's no knowledge they could possibly have of that, because not only was there no internet, there was no electronics, and there was no kind of infrastructure for it. Oh, Paul, cap. Okay, so the kids nowadays sometimes use the word cap as a term to refer to a person being less than fully forthright and honest. So if you say, for example, no cap, and you say that after a sentence, it is to indicate that you're not joking, that you mean it serious. It's like kind of like saying no joke. So if I say like, I hate this class, no cap, that's like I don't like it. Or I could precede a statement with the statement no cap. Like I say, no cap, this low-key was like not fun. You know, so it's a word. It's a phrase that means I'm not joking and I'm being serious. So Paul, you say back in your day, an insult to a friend, capping on my friend. Oh no, well, I mean, I guess you could get capped in the knees, like, you know, like, oh, you got capped, like you would be getting shot, in another use of slang. But anyway, I want to go to other examples. Someone talked about butt dial. Yeah, well, before telecommunications in the era of the phone, there wouldn't have been any such thing as dialing, and certainly it wouldn't have made sense to people back then because the phones weren't even placed in your pocket before mobile phones became the norm. What was used as an insult for Japanese during World War II? The term cap. Okay, I did not know that either. So learning things from you, which is cool. Yeah, so cap has gone through several iterations of slang meaning. I mean, even, yes, I know what you mean, Preston. Its original usage kind of changes. Internet culture can push changes to the way we use even slang terms. It accelerates the scale, the time scale at which the changes happen, because we can communicate so much more quickly and so much more widespread that it's almost hard to keep track of the trends on the internet with regards to lingo and slang. Anyway, guys, yeet. Okay, you know, Trevor, I'm confused with yeet. At first, yeet I just thought was like yay, like this is awesome, like yeet yeet, like I'm stoked. But then people talk about it's like a whipping motion with the hand. It has to do with a dance. So I kind of lost the plot on yeet myself. But anyway, emojis, right? Emojis do have evolving meanings. Preston, you say it is to throw. I guess so. Depends on the individual user, but I believe that is now like the more dominant meaning of it. Okay, well, good discussion all around. Stipulative definitions. Let me hit you with what the book said on the point, and then we can move to the next. Dictionary definitions are only one type of definition. Other types include stipulative, etc. A stipulative definition is one that's given to a new term, such as gigabyte or decaf, right? Decaffeination doesn't make sense until the industrial processes and so forth to remove caffeine exist. So that would not have made sense prior to that advent. Or to a new combination of old terms, such as skyscraper or laptop, right? Before we had the architectural achievements of the modern industrial age, there were no skyscrapers. So speaking to a peasant in the medieval era about skyscrapers would not have had any meaning. A stipulative definition may also be a new definition of an existing word, such as the addition of heterosexual to the definitions of the term straight. Yeah, today the word straight, as you guys know, can refer to a person of heterosexual sexual orientation. But in a time prior to the 20th century, when all forms of sexual orientation, aside from being heterosexual, were considered deviant and unspoken, unmentionable, then there would not have been any need, in their view, to have language invent terms which distinguish between the case of those that are straight and those that aren't. Okay, so good. Some nice comment on the stipulative definition concept. And then we're going to go ahead to the next. Okay, so the textbook also mentions theoretical definitions. I think that it didn't do much to explain it, really. It's just very simple. Just theoretical definitions are definitions of scientific terms, so terms used in science. So theoretical definitions. So it's just definitions of scientific terms. So sometimes when we want to know the meaning of a word, we want to know it in full, like, scientific detail. And that's when we were dealing with theoretical definitions. So what is force? What is mass? What's acceleration? What is entropy? To know the meaning of these words, you would have to consider a theory provided in science, which gives you a theoretical account of its precise meaning. So When you study in a science class, whether it's physics, biology, chemistry, geology, or whatever the case may be, you're going to be treated to a whole host of theoretical definitions, and then it's your job as the person learning about it to master those definitions, know how they are applied to facts, and so on. So, science informs us about the world, not just on an everyday conversational level, but on a deep theoretical level. And so that's another main source of content for language. We've also got, operational definitions. So let me try and mention what those are, and we'll go into some examples also here. Okay, so with operational definitions, what those are just when we use a boundary or a threshold in order to create standardization in the use of a term. Okay, so let me write that and then we'll go into some examples. The use of a boundary or threshold. So I'm just going to put slash, boundary slash threshold in order to create standardization. Okay, so sometimes a person, or not just a person, but sometimes we as people want to have a common understanding, a uniform understanding of a specific word, and we don't want to let it devolve down to each individual's own personal way of looking at it. So we have to operationally define the concept in a way that creates a standardized norm for all. That typically involves the stipulation of a boundary or a threshold above which the term either does or does not apply, and below which the opposite. So let me give you some examples, and then I think it'll become clearer for you. What is the boundary above which we say this person is defined legally, at least in our state of California anyway, as being under the influence while driving? What is the definition legally of DUI? Driving under the influence. There's a boundary, there's a threshold, and we say that at this level, above it, we apply that label or definition, under the influence. Below it, we do not. So maybe some know this. Probably many of you do, because if you've taken your driver's tests or permit tests, these I think would be questions for you. So what is that legal limit above and below which the distinction of under the influence applies? Okay, so Preston, you're giving me the right answer, but prove one issue though. No, not 21 years old. You're talking about age of eligibility to drink. That's a different question, which I guess is also sort of operationally defined. I mean, we could have made that age threshold 20 or 22 or 18 like it is in some other countries. But in the United States, we've just settled on one age, and that's the uniform standard. So you say 0.04, Preston, but that's not correct. Let's get the fact. Sorry, I gave you credit too fast. I mean, you're along the right lines, but does anybody know this fact? Oh, you don't know what it is, Preston? I mean, someone else has to know. I don't want to just tell you guys. Come on. The blood alcohol percentage. You mentioned 0.04. It does depend on where, but it's in California, it is 0.08. You guys do not know how much alcohol you can or can't drink? Okay, here, little lesson. Don't go into the car when your alcohol blood level is at or above 0.08 if you're over 21. If you're under 21, I think it's 0.01. It's almost like you can't have any alcohol in there if you were tested for it. So most are under 21, so I guess in that case, maybe you haven't memorized this fact yet or not too worried about it. But when you turn 21, just know that for the purposes of the law, 0.08 will be the level of the limit. Above that, you're determined to be too drunk to drive. Below that, you're not. And again, yeah, it does vary from state to state. I think in like more some conservative states like Utah, it is 0.05, which is very low. I feel like for most people, that's like one drink or maybe 1.5. But anyway, to the point. Some people, have you ever met a person like this where they're like, I can handle my drinks? And some people, when they're at 0.08, they're a mess. But me, I could be 0.15 and I'll be fine. I'm good with liquor. So some person might say, I don't believe I'm feeling drunk until I'm above that. Another person could give the claim, I'm a lightweight. When I even have one sip and I'm at 0.03, I feel tipsy and I don't feel good to drive. But we cannot have a million different standards for a million different people. We have one uniform standard that we have to be able to apply equally in the law to all cases. So we just invent the stipulated threshold of 0.08, and we leave that as the line in the sand. Okay? It is useful to not drink and drive, yes, of course. But if you are going to ever have any alcohol in your system and drive, and you're over 21, just know that you'd be liable for penalties if it was detectable at a level above 0.08. How about the age of adulthood? Okay, like what threshold do we have in our legal system for being an adult? Above this number, we say they're an adult, and below it, we say they're not. Now, this one I'm sure everyone can say. What's the limit line here? Now we're not talking about percentage of blood alcohol content, but years. That's right, Kayla. It's 18 years. So once you attain 18 years, for all legal purposes, you're an adult in our system. Now, could we have said it be 19? Or could we have said it be 17? Sure. But we have to have a common standard that we can all apply equally in the law. So we say that it's 18. Now, you're right. Not all privileges of adulthood are immediately accessible in every state, at least, when you are 18. You're not allowed yet to drink. You're not allowed to, I guess, rent a car until 25 or something like that. But anyway, the age of adulthood is a stipulated threshold. It's an operational definition. Are there some people who are like in their 30s who feel like they're still just as immature and childish as they were when they were 10? Yes. Are there some people who are very precocious, wise beyond their years, teenagers who say, you know, I feel like I'm a more mature adult than my parents even? That's also true. But again, we can't have it depend on each person's personal assessment of how they rank along the metrics of adulthood. We have to have a kind of common uniform standard, and that's why we say that it is 18. Other operationally defined concepts. Can anybody else think of any? I've hit you with two. I've said adulthood, DUI. I have a few more that I could mention, but let's see if any of you guys have a thought on this. Another operationally defined concept. So think of something where we define it according to a boundary, and beyond this stated boundary, the term either does or doesn't apply anymore. Can anyone think of another case? Maybe? Driver's license, yes. That's the age of eligibility to have a driver's license, 16. In a way, though, eligibility for something is a little different than saying that a concept is applied to a person, like a description, like adult at 18, but that's okay. Paul, same kind of thing, though, in your example here. You must be this tall to get on the ride. Getting on the ride is not really a concept, though. It's permission to take an action. So it's similar with the license case. But like the concept of too drunk to drive is defined at 0.08. The concept of adult, legally anyway in our system, is defined at 18 years old. Let me give you another one, okay? What about poverty? Does anybody know how we measure the concept of poverty for legal purposes in our system? For a person to be in the state of poverty or in the condition of poverty, they have to be above or below what line? Do we know this line that I'm referring to in the case of poverty? Maybe let me know if you do know this or not. Yes, living below the poverty line. So the poverty line is just a number calculated by the government which determines what annual level of income a person must have to be either classified as poverty or not. There's a federal poverty line and there's a state of California poverty line. They're a little different. The state of California one's a little bigger than the federal one because we have more expensive housing and also maybe a little more pay in some cases. But at any rate, suppose that you make a certain amount of money and it falls beneath the amount stated in the stipulated poverty line. Then that means that you are in the condition of poverty. Now, do some people say, hey, I've got all the money in the world, but I feel poor because I have no friends? Sure. Are there some people that say, you know, I don't have a lot of money, but I feel rich because I'm happy, healthy, and I've got great friends? Yes, people say that also, and there's no problem with saying that. But the problem is that we can't just have the real concept of poverty defined so subjectively from person to person based on these other criteria. So to have a uniform standard under the law, we have the poverty line threshold. Yes, I don't know the formula that is used to calculate it, but there's a mathematical formula and an economic formula which determines this number, and then you can just compare your own annual income against the number. Yeah, percentage of median income, adjusted regularly, true enough, but you can still convert that figure into a dollar amount if you want to calculate it as such. Don't want to go too far into the weeds of the case, but that's fair enough. Okay, so also, how about obesity? Well, no, this is not stipulated though, because if a person has 20/20 vision, that's not a matter of arbitrary stipulation. We don't define into existence perfect vision. The person either has it because of the condition of the eye or they don't. And the fact that pilots have to have 20/20 vision is not just a matter of arbitrary line in the sand drawing. There's no above or below threshold here. I take it as a point of truth, what you're saying, although I don't have any way of quickly confirming it, that the Air Force has such a standard. But if they do, it's probably just because, obviously, they need people who are pilots in these highly sensitive positions where life and death are on the line. They need these kind of people to have good vision so they don't make errors while they do their job. I was asking about obesity, one more, while we're on the subject of operational definition. Does anybody know how obesity is? Like, when is a person obese? What's the definition of obese? There's a number here. There's another metric that is used to determine that. And what do you know about that? How is obesity determined? Or do you know it? What's the metric? It's BMI. Yes, that's right, Trevor. It's the body mass index number. So BMI is a number that you can calculate by simply plugging in your height, weight, and gender to a BMI calculator. And what it'll give you is a numeric value. Now, medically speaking, we define obesity as having a BMI number that is above a certain threshold value. So are there people, some of them, that are like anorexic with eating disorders that are very thin and they are like, I feel like I'm so big, I feel like I'm huge? Yes. Are there other people that are quite, large or whatever who say, you know what, I feel comfortable in my body, maybe I'm just big boned? Yes. But at least medically, we cannot have the person's subjective assessment of how they rank along a weight scale determine the concept of obesity. Rather, according to the body mass index metric, which can be uniformly assigned according to a stipulated value. So here I'll read about it, and it says this in the book. Operational definitions are another type of definition. An operational definition is a concise definition of a measure used to provide standardization. The lexical definition of obese, very fat or overweight, is not precise enough for a physician to determine if a person's weight is a health risk or if the person is a candidate for gastric bypass surgery. Instead, the medical profession defines obesity operationally in terms of body mass index. Operational definitions may change over time. For instance, the definition of poverty varies from country to country as well as over time. In the United States, the poverty threshold was defined by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services in 2016 as $11,880 for a single individual. It's a very low amount of money. Can you imagine that? 2016 is pretty recent, $11,880. So that's a person making net income of less than $1,000 a month, and that's the federal poverty line. In 1982, the poverty threshold for a single individual by the same department was $4,680. So, inflation and everything else causes the number to get bigger, but it still seems pretty hard for a person to live totally self-sufficient off of $11,880 a year. But anyway, the main point was just to know what is an operational definition, and we gave some examples. There's too drunk to drive, poverty, and obesity, and others that I guess you can consider or think about. Adulthood, for example. All right. So one more type of definition that's mentioned in the book. But let me think about what I want to say, because there's an aspect of teaching where you have to pace the lesson and you don't run too far ahead of the notes that you have so that everything gets covered in the right time. So I think this is a natural break. I'm going to pick it up here. So we'll finish one more type of definition, which are the persuasive definitions. That takes a little discussion. And then after that, I will talk to you guys about what are qualities of a good definition, what are some different communication styles, and then what are some different rhetorical devices. So that'll be our lesson plan for the Thursday meeting. I guess for now, though, I'll call things to a close and let you guys go. Peachy, stop. Sorry, 1 second, okay? Give me a half second. Crazy kitty, come on. Sorry, thanks. Yeah, off here to the corner, I'm seeing her trying to get into some of my charging cables and play with them. I don't want her to bite those and mess them up, so I had to stop. Okay, so back to what I was saying. We will finish this lesson on chapter 3 on Thursday, but between now and then, I guess, just have a really good couple of days. Pay attention for my Canvas announcement. I'm going to send either probably tomorrow, I think, and then that'll notify you that the grades are done for the first quiz. If you're still looking for your grade on the first homework, let me know anytime because I've graded those and they're done. But for now, I guess I'll let us go. Are we all good? Let me get your reaction and closing thoughts as we say goodbye, and then I'll end the stream for now. Everything's good? Yeah, especially in SoCal, that's true, Paul. It's very hard to make it even off of an amount, maybe 3 or 4 times that, but it's okay. So, all good to go, guys? Perfect. Well, thanks again. Preston, you say, I find BMI to be somewhat inaccurate by itself, especially with bodybuilders or those with more muscle mass than most. True enough, yes. I mean, there is a fair critique that can be given of body mass index. Is a person really obese, for example, if they have like just huge muscles, and so when they plug in the mass, height, and etc., gender, it spits out a number that claims obesity, but the person's actually quite cut and everything else. Yes, there's going to be some exceptions, I guess, but again, with an operational definition, it's kind of a double-edged sword. You want standardization, but sometimes a uniform application of a concept to every case can be criticized for not being sensitive enough to the particulars of one case. Paul, clapping back, it's not inaccurate per se because it is the definition, but its implications may not be applicable in those situations. Subtle rejoinder. I agree. Well, guys, like I said, we got to close at some time. So you don't got to go home, but can't stay on the stream. So I'm going to let you go. But have a good one, all right? And be in touch with me if there's anything you need. I'm checking my messages each day. So until next time, all right? See you then. Bye-bye. Thank you.